As I said, we made this about financing the future, and finance, of course, is everything you just heard about with private equity, with team investment, sports league investment, asset classes. Now we move to a topic everybody has been hearing about, and that is the House settlement, name, image, likeness, the future landscape of college sports. So I'll invite our panel to come up as I introduce them. Come on up, guys. We have Angelica McDonald, co-founder of RISE HBCU, the managing partner of McDonald Law. We have Olivia Nuss, the head of business affairs, student athlete NIL. We have AT, class of 21 here. AT is in talent marketing at Excel. And AT is, again, a proud alum of this program. We have Eric Roedl. Eric is our new athletic director. He just made a new basketball coach hire as well. Yeah. And then we have me. You know me. But I'm asked every day about NIL, so I can just answer those questions here. Our moderators are two of our star student leaders, Jacob Deradoorian and Chandon Pierre. I'll note that Chandon is one of maybe two in the country who are law students and active student athletes on the football team. So let's welcome our panel.
Hey guys, thank you for joining us here today. We're really excited to talk everything NIL really. I guess we'll just go across and give a brief introduction of some of our panelists, and if they have something to add after, then we'll do that, and then we'll go ahead and get into questions. So first we have Andrew Brandt. Many of you don't need an introduction, but for those of you who don't know, Andrew Brandt, he was a former vice president and general counsel of the Green Bay Packers. Had a very successful career there, moved on and became a consultant for the Philadelphia Eagles for a few years, still does some work with them. And he's the current host of a weekly podcast that averages over 20,000 listeners called The Business of Sports with Andrew Brandt, taking listeners inside and out of the legal landscape of sports. He's also the current columnist of Sports Illustrated and The Athletic, where he writes weekly columns on legal and business issues in sports with his unique vantage point as a former team executive. And then currently professor of practice and executive director of the Jeffrey S. Moorad Center for the Study of Sports Law.
Yeah, what I want to just say opening is, and I'll let all my colleagues talk more, is just the reason I'm on this panel is because my background in professional sports is now mirroring exactly what I see in college sports. Whether you think that's a good thing, a bad thing, the reality is what we're seeing with this antitrust settlement, what we're seeing across college sports is a more professionalized version of college sports than we've ever had before. You're going to hear a lot on this panel and throughout the next several weeks about something called a revenue cap, which is a salary cap, which is pro. That's a pro concept. That's professional sports. You're going to hear about circumvention of the cap and cap compliance and contracts between schools and athletes. Again, professionalized college sports is where we're headed. So I'll just leave it at that as we begin.
Next, we have Angelica. A little bit about Angelica. She graduated from she graduated from North Carolina. She graduated from North Carolina Central University School of Law. From there, she has become a very accomplished attorney, working in many different areas. She's a part of the North Carolina Bar Association, the North Carolina Black Lawyers Association, the Black Entertainment and Sports Lawyers Association, the Sports Law Lawyers Association, and the American Bar Association. So, in a recent role, she has got her NBA PA license to negotiate on behalf of NBA athletes, and she's also the co-founder of RISE HBCU and managing attorney of McDonald Law PLLC.
Next up, we have Olivia Nuss. Olivia received her JD at Louisiana State University and began work at the LSU Athletics Department focused on name, image, and likeness, just as it emerged. Currently, Olivia is the head of legal and business affairs at Student Athlete NIL, where as part of her work, she oversees all contract negotiations, including student athlete agreements, agents agreements, advertising agreements, and sponsorships. And she also does a great deal of work there with university-focused collectives. We have Eric Roedl, a Villanova University undergrad who came back home. While in undergrad, he served as the co-captain of the men's tennis team, leading Villanova to a 15-6 record his senior year. He received his master's in sports administration from UNC Chapel Hill, his MBA from William & Mary. Some of his previous experience includes stints at EY, William & Mary, the Temple Athletic Department, and most recently, before returning home, the Oregon Athletic Department. Eric now serves as Vice President and Director of Athletics for your Villanova Wildcats. Finally, we have AT. AT is a 21 grad from the Charles Widger School of Law. He pioneered the Villanova Sports Law football negotiation team, winning the competition in Tulane in 2019. Currently, AT is a senior manager in talent marketing and NIL at Excel Sports Management, and he also sits on the board of advisors for the Jeffrey S. Moorad Center for the Study of Sports Law. Before we hop into questions, I'd like to throw it over to Professor Brandt for a quick update on the House settlement, where things stand after the hearing this week, just for a platform going forward.
Dominate, there's so many good voices up here, but what happened this week was the final approval hearing for the House settlement, and in simplest terms, I'll try to be simple. The House settlement is a settlement of 3 large antitrust cases against the NCAA that could have, without a settlement, gone to trial in maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years and led to $1, 2, 3, 4, 5, $6 billion of damages or beyond for basically all the things the NCAA has done to limit, restrict earning power, maximizing income for college athletes, student athletes. The settlement was reached between plaintiffs' attorneys and NCAA attorneys. Back a year ago, there was preliminary approval granted in October, and we all waited with bated breath for Monday's hearing 4 days ago. There's been no final approval yet. My personal view is there will be. I don't know when, hopefully soon. The Judge Wilkin in California, had some issues she wanted plaintiffs and NCAA attorneys to address, and hopefully they will be addressed. 3 parts real quick. $2.8 billion of back damages for student athletes that were unable to profit off the new NIL in the past 3 or 4 years. $280 million a year for 10 years, apportioned out primarily football, but other players as well, all according to a class action settlement formula. Also, roster limits, we'll talk more about that. Instead of scholarship limits, there will be roster limits. Some rosters of college sports teams will go down. Scholarship availability will go up. That is in controversy as we speak. But the primary feature, as I mentioned on the sort of professionalization, is this revenue cap. We've heard a lot about a $20.5 million figure for sharing with student athletes across all sports. That's based on a formula of revenue for athletic departments in the Power 4 conferences, roughly $98 million, roughly 22% is $20.5 million. Those are the big 3 features of the settlement. As I said, it is not approved yet. If it does, starting July 1, the academic year 2025-26, we will have a new structure of college sports where schools opting in will be able to pay up to $20.5 million of direct payments to athletes for their NIL rights. That's a lot of money. It's a far cry from where we were, and I'll leave you with saying that will create a situation where NIL finally means what I've always thought it's going to mean, which is now it's legal. Now it's legal. Paying student athletes will become legal. So that's where we are legally.
Thanks, Andrew, for that. On the topic of House, we do want to dive a little bit deeper. So, we have a general question that all of you guys are more than welcome to answer. So under the House settlement, the current terms, student athletes will have a mandatory reporting requirement to their schools and Deloitte, a financial consulting firm, who will act as a clearinghouse to vet NIL deals in value of over $600. They will determine whether these deals are fair market value and serve a valid business purpose. So the question is, what issues do you foresee as it relates to determining the fair market value, what it actually is, with this large discrepancies among divisions, conferences, and a follow-up question to that is, how do you see non-disclosure agreements kind of playing into the House settlement, if enforced, if student athletes are obligated under NCAA bylaws to disclose to their schools their deal terms?
I'm happy to take that one first. And I think before we look forward, I think it's important to show where we've come. So my company, Student Athlete NIL, started primarily to service a need in the industry. So when we look at NIL, I like to divide it simply into what we consider organic NIL, which is brand approaches company, which is quite simple to understand. It's essentially influencer advertising, right? And then you have this secondary need in the market, which has always been there, but has emerged, as more than money in shoe boxes in recent days, right? And it's boosters that are looking to either provide financial assistance to a particular sport, or they just want to see their university generally succeed. And so we are servicing more of the, what I call synthetic NIL market, right? Which has been framed as collectives, as booster organizations up to this point. I think there's a stigma around it. I think collectives are always seen as primarily bad or, trying to pay athletes under the table. And that's not generally what we service, right? If there's a need in the market, we seek to fill it. And so what we have done as an organization is actually come up with essentially a mini advertising agency, right, for all of these particular universities that want to provide NIL opportunities to their student athletes, but maybe either A, don't have the resources to do so, or B, just really don't know how to get those donor dollars into legitimate deals. And so my company has feet on the ground people as well as the tech to provide that solution. So we sit at an interesting place in the market right now where you have tech companies on one side that are essentially trying to be your payment processors for a lot of these NIL deals, and you have traditional multimedia rights partners on the other who are saying perhaps we could fill that need by providing legitimate services along with our multimedia rights holders to maybe engage with the student athletes. We sit in the middle where contributor dollars come in and they say, we want X amount of athletes paid, we want to support this team, but how do we do it in a compliant manner? And so that's primarily been my job for the past 3 years. And my legal career is just about as old as the industry. It's about 3.5 years. And so I transitioned from compliance directly to this role in that now we've gone from, 5 employees to almost 40 in 3 years, where we have account managers who are on the ground with each student athlete, helping them understand what their obligations are. They perform deliverables, either autograph signings, appearances, or social media posts for us in order to get paid. And then we have general managers who are responsible at a regional level for providing sales structure on a regional, national, and primarily local level for these universities. So we are almost functioning as a non-traditional agency, kind of adjacent to what AT does on a student athlete level for these particular universities. And so as far as the cap, I think the challenge that you're seeing with the House settlement is because collectives and the stigma around collectives is poor, right? And there are a lot of independently run collectives that do operate under the table still. There is a need for the NCAA to manage what Professor Brandt notes as cap circumvention. So what right now they're trying to do is say every athlete must disclose every deal over $600 from a particular company or entity. So you can't do multiple contracts for under $600, right? It's if there's one entity paying you more than $600, you must report it. That is upon signature, upon execution of the contract. and there will be an enforcement process in place, which we don't have the details on quite yet, that will essentially evaluate whether it is true NIL or whether you are just paying them for play, essentially. And so it's very, very easy when you take someone who's getting paid $100,000 for one social media post, right? Perhaps that's not fair market value, but who's to tell a buyer what they can do with their money if they're willing to pay $100,000 to have this athlete appear or sign an autograph? I think conceptually it's hard to understand how a particular entity or one company can say, hey, third party, you can't do that with your money, right? So I'm interested to see how it will play out, and how from an enforcement standpoint, they're going to take on challenges. I don't want to dominate, but if anyone...
Yeah, is this working? Yeah, thanks so much, Olivia. That was some great background. And I think that first question is really the key question of this house settlement, because, you know, you've got different types of universities, and I think a lot of the driver behind the house settlement are the schools in the Power Four, and just the vast sums of revenue involved with their multimedia rights agreements, the escalation of coaching salaries, the overall professionalization of college athletics, coinciding with the transfer portal, coinciding with permissive NIL opportunities back in 2021. And what's happened now is a completely unregulated market. And so, you know, if you pay close attention actually to what's happening right now in the college basketball transfer portal market, we're seeing some staggering sums that student athletes are being offered by schools, because right now it's a completely unregulated system. You have a patchwork of state laws. You have some very broad, overarching NCAA rules in place as it pertains to NIL. But there's really no guardrails around it. And so that's how we've been operating for the last few years. So now we're going to move forward under a house settlement where you're going to have more structure. And that structure, along with kind of some parameters around the back damages, that's the win for the NCAA and for the conferences. Now the question, though, we have a cap. That cap is $20.5 million. I can tell you right now, sitting here, coming from the University of Oregon, that this past year, there are at least a dozen schools out there where student athletes earned far in excess of $20.5 million through their collectives. So now we're going to move all of that collective activity and the donations that came into collectives, we're going to move that in-house. Universities can collect those gifts and distribute in the form of a revenue share, which does not require any type of quid pro quo. It doesn't have to involve exchange of value. It's a straight revenue share. And then that third-party piece that Chandon asked about and Olivia spoke about, that's going to be the NIL piece. And collectives and universities are already trying to figure out how are we going to continue to pay our student athletes at a certain level so that we're not going backwards from where we were in 23-24 or 24-25. So what's the definition of fair market value for these third-party agreements? There's no baseline. There's no foundation for this right now. Some would say it's what somebody's willing to pay a student athlete to make 10 appearances and do an autograph signing or do some social activation. That's the key question of the house settlement. If the third-party review and clearinghouse process does not have teeth, then the settlement does not accomplish what it was intended to.
Yeah, and then I think from, hello? There we go. I think from my perspective, like, it is hard for me to imagine that the clearinghouse will have teeth, right? I think we've seen it in the last week and week and a half in basketball with cap circumvention, right? That's been the name of the game, pre-settlement, to front load money before the settlement happened and get it paid out pre-June 30th to circumvent the cap. Or in football, to restructure deals pre-April 7th, now pre-whenever, get money paid out before June 30th. That way the cap hit is lessened. And it's only the schools that are liquid enough to front load that money that are able to do it. So a lot of schools just don't have the money to do it like that. And I think when the clearinghouse comes into play, like, it's just a fact that, like you said, like $20.5 million just in football, if you spend it 100% in football, is not enough to build a championship roster. It's just not. Like, the top of the QB market was around $4 million this year. You're not going to spend a fifth of your cap on your QB and have to fill out the rest of the roster spots. It's just not going to work. And I think the clearinghouse, if they try to enforce something, right, and they say, you know, what you're getting paid isn't fair market value, and O-lineman getting paid $1 million for a handful of social posts, let's call it, and there tries to be teeth, and the conferences who are, you know, in charge of the clearinghouse try to get in the way of it. If the school doesn't have the cap space and that money now can't count against the cap, the student athlete is obligated to either pay the money back or void the contract. Who is the NCAA or the conferences to tell two independent parties that they do not have the right to contract, and one party does not have the right to pay a student athlete whatever they want to pay him? I think the second it tries to be enforced, I think we're looking at more litigation. I don't think the House lawsuit solves the unregulated market. I think the separation between the haves and have-nots will happen even more. Like, the schools who have money will spend it. I think the Big East has an incredible advantage in basketball, just because there's no need to spend as much money in football that the SEC and Big Ten does. So you can really build a really good basketball roster from the rev share, which isn't necessarily the case at a school with a massive football program. But at the end of the day, I don't think the House case will solve anything. I think it opens more windows to how do we circumvent the cap? How is the clearinghouse going to be? Are they going to have any teeth to enforce anything? And if they do, what are the repercussions? And if it does get litigated again, I am hard-pressed to imagine that there won't be an injunction and the student-athlete isn't still going to be able to get paid whatever they're contracted for. Like, the contract amount, I think you called it synthetic NIL. Like, let's be real for what it is. Like, that is your playing contract, is what the collective and the rev share is paying you. That's what that is. I would say maybe like 2% of D1 athletes have really legitimate earning power in, like, the influencer marketing space. A lot of people do, but, like, I mean, like, legit dollars, the Caitlin Clarks, Jared McCain's of the world. Like, there's a very small handful of student athletes that actually have that. So a lot of these kids' values are put on these collective deals or rev share deals, and the market has spoken. Like, the market will not go down. The college football playoff is only going to get bigger and generate more revenue. The schools are only going to have their MMR partners, you know, jersey patches, on-field patches, whatever it is, to generate more revenue to take on the $20.5 million line item that they're going to have on their budgets. So I think the way all this is going, I don't think the House case solves much. I think we are still looking at a pretty wild space post-House settlement. And I think the conferences can pretend that they want fairness and equity at NIL and a stable landscape. But at the same time, everyone wants to win in recruiting. Everyone wants to put a championship roster on the field. And I think that is going to take more precedent than the larger mindset of how do we create a fairer environment in NIL where there isn't such a separation of the haves and have-nots.
I think it's also worth noting, you know, AT, what you said about the penalties, right? I think athletic directors and to some extent the student athletes themselves don't have a full grasp on, or maybe they do, on what this clearinghouse will look like and exactly what the penalties are. But from the athletes that I've spoken with, it's, you know, reading what is in the articles attached to the settlement as it is, the student athlete essentially has to terminate the contract and give back the money or sacrifice their eligibility. And if there's university involvement, I've heard rumors of penalties anywhere from, you know, reduction of the cap in whatever the discrepancy amount is in the third party deal to, you know, penalties for postseason play. So that's really what the NCAA sounds like they're banking on, is the fact that they will be scared into, you know, the situation where they won't be able to participate in championships. And obviously CFP is different, but, you know, for basketball schools, that's a real threat.
The gearing up process, as we've heard from everyone here, it's a gargantuan task. I don't know if the NCAA is there yet. You think about, again, where I came from, the NFL, you have a cap compliance department at the league office of 25 to 30 people. You have each team, which would equate to each school, has 3 to 5 people that work in the salary cap area. This is not happening yet. This is, you talk about the task of managing this. And I don't blame current leadership. Charlie Baker, who's the president of the NCAA, came in from politics, governor of Massachusetts, Republican governor, Democratic state. He's doing the best he can. The leadership's doing the best they can. But for 50 years, this organization would not accept the possibility of student-athlete economics. And it's come back to bite them from people like us. It's the lawyers. Always blame the lawyers, right? The lawyers have changed college athletics because they go to judges and they say, you know, Judge X, we have a chemistry major that can go to IBM or wherever and make millions if they offered, but an athlete can't do that. We have a music major that can go play in the Philadelphia Philharmonic, but athletes can't do that. And judges are like, yeah, you're right. And NCAA loses, and they lose and lose and lose. And here we are. Here we are. We're at a reckoning. Whereas I keep saying that now stands for now it's legal. Can you imagine 10 years ago thinking that universities are writing multi-million-dollar checks to their athletes? We're there. You want to add?
I think everybody has touched on something that I was thinking about touching on, so it's going to be like me trying to figure out what else to say. But I think that this is like the NCAA's, I won't say their last play, but their play at trying to continue to have control that they've lost. Like, I think that ship has sailed. So now they're trying to get their way back into knowing what the deals are and getting that data that, like, most of the schools are not necessarily getting the data of how much these students are making. They don't truly know because they're not reporting. Most deals are not reported, so they don't know. So of course this $600 requirement, the NCAA is trying to understand too, and I think it's just them trying to continue to have control. I also think that it's important. I'm curious to see, I know you talked about like of course from the collective standpoint, but I'm interested to see if any deals like from the traditional NIL standpoint, the brand deals will come into play, because who's to say that a booster doesn't somehow funnel that money into a big corporate deal, and it is now mass because it's not really going through a collective. So I'd be interested to see how they figure out ways to get around those problematic areas of these NIL deals and how they combat it. Because like you, Professor Ray, like they're going to continue to lose. So until they really embrace it, because they're not really embracing it, they're forced to embrace what has been going on. So until they really truly embrace it and try to come up with possible solutions, I think we're just going to continue to spin our wheels, and it's so muddy, like it's so murky. There's more questions than there are answers, and I think that it just continues to move into a place where athletes are just going to become employees and be considered professionals and no longer amateurs.
One other quick comment on the disclosure piece and NDA concept. We're already seeing at least one state, if not multiple, that have drafted proposed bills that would exempt their student athletes from falling under that requirement and exempt their institutions from being penalized. So we're already seeing states try to create competitive advantage that goes in conflict with the House settlement. That's how hyper-competitive all of this is.
Yeah, fantastic. So much of the discourse on NIL for the past few years has been about Power Four athletic departments, right, and the top earning athletes. Your Caitlin Clarks, right? But there is some worry, and there were many objections that we heard, right, from athletes in smaller sports or at smaller universities. So we would love to hear some thoughts, some views on how the House settlement or the future evolution of NIL will affect these Olympic sports and these underfunded universities.
Well, I don't know much about the Olympic space, but from my standpoint, I represent HBCU athletes, and the conversation about rev sharing for the D1 schools, it's been like a conversation of, well, first of all, investing in NIL and NIL education is already a challenge. HBCUs, a lot of the smaller schools are already underfunded. Their athletic departments, they just make enough to do what they need to do, and sometimes even going into the red. So talking about NIL has already been a challenge. And then they may be able to get access to good talent, but then they end up losing that talent that performs well to the bigger schools. So them being able to even operate in a more balanced way in this sector is already a challenge. But then when we talk about rev sharing, if they were to opt into rev sharing, now some of them can't even really play when it comes to NIL, but now we're adding rev sharing. So then it's going to take more money away. Like it's already hard enough. So it's like, well, okay, do we invest in the NIL, trying to develop a collective? Because a lot of HBCUs don't have collectives. But then it's like, well, okay, if we're going to do rev sharing, maybe we should just, or if we're investing in anything that's semi-NIL, it'll be rev sharing. But how are we going to even compete with that when it comes to those dollars, right? Because we know this is based on like media deals. So the income that, a Power 4 school is going to have versus like a small HBCU when it comes to the media deal is not going to necessarily be comparable. So, it is really hard because some aren't going to opt in. We've even seen schools downgrade from D1 to D3. Some may do that, roster spots, the limits and everything. So I think it's really going to be a challenge for smaller schools and HBCUs to continue to be able to compete at the level that they would like and keep their talent. I know that I've heard that like students that are transferring to other schools, they're not necessarily talking about they're transferring because they didn't have access to the NIL dollars at the HBCU or the small school level. A lot of them are saying that they want more eyes, they want more access to opportunities, especially if they want to play professionally. NIL is not necessarily the reason why they're leaving, but I was just discussing this with one of the students, and I was like, well, maybe if they could compete from the NIL's perspective, maybe it'd be a reason why the student would stay. So I wish that the revenue sharing would possibly help, but I think it just continues to kind of spread that gap a little bit further.
I would also just add, with schools that opt in and want to rev share, the idea has been, okay, well, now operating in a deficit, we need to come up with this money to rev share. And I know there was an article probably 2 months ago about how Cal Poly has already cut their entire swimming and diving team, men's and women's, and have moved it to a club sport as opposed to, where they can compete for championships. And so when you have Olympic sports student athletes who have committed to a school under the premise that they are going to be able to compete and possibly move on. I know AT was talking about earlier, 80% of our Olympians are also college athletes in this country. And so it's definitely a concern for a lot of these athletes who that's their last chance to compete, is at a collegiate level or move on, in the rare chance to the Olympics. So it's definitely a concern.
And I think we need to still prioritize sports as a country, right? I think we just need to admit that the structure that our country has on Olympic sports is not sustainable. The majority of schools rely on football to bankroll all of the Olympic sports. And there's an equity problem with the football players putting in the work, generating revenue, and all that money going to other sports to pay for planes and hotels and food and all that. So there's a legitimate equity problem. But then the secondary problem is, if you let football take the money football makes, who funds the Olympic sports? Like, we can't lose that. The majority of Olympians do play NCAA sports, and like, that's not something we can lose. I think for a long time, college athletics has not operated like a business. I think if you look at the Big Ten, you look at all of the non-revenue generating sports, right? They're taking flights across the country, let's say to go to Penn State, staying up at a hotel, getting fed, playing their game, getting back on a plane, going across the country again. That is not an efficient model to operate a sport that produces no revenue. I don't know why we cannot localize non-revenue generating sports. Like, I went to a D3 school, none of our sports teams made money. Our football team didn't make any money off of tickets. We would tailgate before the football game and then walk to a bar to watch real, Power 4 football. Like, there was no ticket revenue, no TV revenue, but we still operated over 20 varsity sports. Like, this idea about, like, athletic departments don't have money, they're always in the red. It's like, there should be a real analysis of, like, where is this money going? And how do we prioritize keeping our sports operational, not just cutting swimming and diving, but how do we focus on operating our school like a business and getting the donations we need to keep everything afloat, while at the same time realizing that, look, it's not equitable for football to be funding everything. It's just not. Like, the ESPN doesn't, I don't know if ESPN's Big Ten, but whoever the Big Ten's TV broadcast partner is, they're not paying for the Big Ten rights because they want to see baseball. Like, they're paying for football. And so I think there needs to be a more honest conversation about, like, what college sports is and how football focused it is. And there needs to be less of, like, the sob story that I'm hearing from universities of, we don't have the money, or operating in the red. It's like, okay, well, maybe take a step back and figure out how to structure this as a business with the understanding that football is a different beast. The entity that oversees football should not be the same entity that oversees, like a water polo. It makes no sense to me. There's no congruency between the two sports. They're operating at two different tiers, which is why, from what I first said, where I don't think the House case is going to solve anything. Like, I think the college sports issue is deeper than the House settlement. It's deeper than NIL. I think there's a fundamental issue of how college sports are being operated, and some of it is uncontrollable with how much money is generated in coaches making over $10 million annually. That is a natural result of the great operations that the NCAA has done in promoting football and March Madness and how they've grown the entire business. But there's too much money in it now to pretend like the athletes that are doing the work to get these TV contracts and coaching salaries and making everything operational, to pretend that they are amateurs and they don't deserve a piece of the pie, and then to put the onus on them to pay for the rest of the student athletes who aren't doing the work that's generating the money.
Yeah, a lot of really good points in there. I think, one statistic that really speaks to that is that if you look at the Big Ten, which along with the SEC is, they're the two richest conferences in the country. If you look back, and you can look this up, last year, half the schools in the Big Ten lost significant money on athletics, and that's due to the flawed business model. They're generating north of $150 million as an athletic program, and yet they still lost money. Some of them well north of $10 million. So I don't really look at this as a big school, small school issue necessarily. Until we develop a more practical, rational approach to college athletics, there's going to continue to be upward pressure on expenses that far outpaces what we can do from a revenue perspective. And we're seeing that across every level of college athletics. If you look at the schools in the group of 6 conferences, they're very large part, well over 50% subsidized by their universities. Their football programs lose money, but they're going to opt in because they want to compete at the highest level, and they're going to rev share. They're going to rev share even though there's no revenue to share. And so that's what's happening in college athletics right now. The schools that have revenue to share are in the Big Ten, the SEC, the Big 12, and the ACC. And the Big East is actually among that group when it comes to the focus on basketball. So I think as an industry, we have to look at how we do business. And we have a responsibility to maintain broad-based sports sponsorship. It's one of the great things about college athletics. But AT made that point. On most big school, in most big school programs, it's football that funds everything else. And when all that football money starts going back into football, what's gonna fund everything else? So something's gonna give there. But we owe it to the industry as the leaders, the NCAA, the athletic directors, the presidents, to find a way to sustain broad-based sports sponsorship.
I think I need to clear up this misconception about the House settlement. I hear a lot of people think that the House settlement allows $20 million to rain down from the sky and land in all these schools' athletic departments. No, this is not new money. As Eric said, this is rev share from revenue most of these schools don't have to share. So again, we can all lament the plight of the student athlete, but I'm not sure where this money's coming from. Boosters have been tapped out. Boosters have donor fatigue. They're being asked for all kinds of requests to fund not only the student athlete money, but facilities and equipment and everything else. So this is a tough ask. And the other thing the House settlement does not address, which is the thing that people have the most problem with in college sports right now, is the transfer portal. The House settlement does not address it. The House settlement does not address the collective bargaining issue, the employee issue. The House settlement does not address Title IX. And there are going to be a slew of Title IX lawsuits. Obviously, most of the money goes to football. There's no female equivalent. So I guess what I'm saying is what I tweet all the time, there will be lawyers. It's not going to stop. But as Eric said, we'll have some structure. We'll hope that there's not lack of COP compliance with our competitors. Everybody, as AT said, is loading up now before July 1. Okay, if you have the liquidity to do that, great. But come July 1, you hope there's going to be somewhat of a financial level playing field, because what we all want in sports is competitive balance. But I think sometimes there's this perception out there that these schools have all this money and these athletes are exploited. And I know, as AT said, it's a primary revenue source is football. But these schools are not, mostly not flowing with money. And House settlement is not giving any school a dime. It's making schools find more money. So I just want to clear that up.
Thank you very much for that insight. Along with House and some of the concerns you mentioned, it seems that one of the bigger criticisms of the House settlement so far has been international student athletes. There's currently no carve-outs in the settlement for international student athletes, and currently they're not able to earn compensation in excess of incidental expenses, food, housing, et cetera. So, do you foresee any issues with the House settlement and international athletes being paid? Are there any risks? And do you see any ways around those risks?
I can take this one if you'd like. And I just want to preface this. I'm not an immigration attorney. This is not legal advice. But we do consult an immigration attorney because while we don't advertise it in our services, the question is often, can we pay an international student athlete? Which is a much more complicated question than simply, are they allowed? It's, will they be allowed back in the country if we do? And so most of our student athletes that I have dealt with are on F1 visas, which restrict basically all work unless there is a particular exception. So there's two types of work that are generally accepted, and if there are any international attorneys or specialists in the audience, you can correct me, but the two types of work that are approved are OPT and CPT, which essentially both have to be related to your area of study. OPT being during your time in school, CPT you can accumulate up to 1 year after. And so these are the only two types of work that we know are allowed. Work also has a broader definition in international law than it does as, your typical independent contractor or employee, right? So work is anything that requires any assertion of any sort of energy from a student athlete. So if you ask them to go to an appearance or an autograph signing, or you ask them to make a social post, all of these things are considered work from a visa law perspective. And one of the things that our council always talks about is the doctrine of non-reviewability for consular officers. So we wouldn't even know if there was an issue with an international student athlete until they go and apply for an extension of visa status or a different type of visa. So a consular officer, and consular officers have very limited training. Some are not even attorneys, right? They go in front of the consular officer and they present what they've done throughout the year, and they either give a yes or no, and that is not subject to any review. A consular officer can deny visa status for any reason or no reason at all, and it is generally not subject to judicial review. So from our standpoint, it's about presenting the risk to the student athlete. Is your $10,000 worth you being deported next year, right? So we don't have enough information to know if any payment to an international student athlete is safe. We never use the word safe. We say we can reduce the risk, right? So there are plenty of ways to reduce risk if you are going to pay an international student athlete. They're paid into an international bank account for passive use of their name, image, and likeness. So you purchase the rights to their name, image, and likeness, and they do no active work in order to perform services, right? We've advertised overseas. We're lucky to have overseas partnerships with sports brands, one being actually a college soccer licensing and basically jerseys, t-shirts, those types of uses, but only in particular countries. So the advertising portion is very limited in that way as well. But generally, we try to discourage it because we just don't know. There's not enough that's been said. We have no guidance from federal law in order to know if this is even a safe avenue.
Yeah, I'll add to that. We, again, not legal advice because I'm not an international attorney, but we've gone through this with a handful of student athletes who are international athletes, and it's always a passive versus active conversation of what is the risk of allowing passive licensing of your NIL and getting paid for it. Because it's not that they're not allowed to get paid. They're not allowed to do work for the payment, right? So they can make money. It's just limited in the work that they can do to actually make that money. So I think it's definitely all about negating risk, but there are situations, I think, and I haven't seen this, so I'd be interested to hear your take on this, is in a rev share deal, right? Like most rev share deals are passive licensing of NIL that the student athlete signs away. Would a school be comfortable signing an international student athlete to a passive rev share deal and then paying them? Because as long as they have a TIN and they're properly paying their taxes, if you're not actually doing work for the money, I feel like there are attorneys who could definitely get comfortable with that, but I'm interested to hear your take.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that we've had some dialogue on, and I've talked with leadership at other schools about. What we've dealt with in the past has been third-party NIL activity, whether it's between an athlete and a company or an athlete and a collective. And now House brings this revenue share component where we're going to have a direct financial relationship with a student athlete. So this introduces a new level of risk to the institution, not just to the student athlete. So I know enough on this to be dangerous from a legal perspective, but what I do know is that schools don't want to put themselves at a competitive disadvantage when it comes to the recruitment and to revenue sharing with international student athletes, but they also don't want to put themselves in an incredible risky situation when it comes to federal funding and some of the other things that come with visa issues.
Thank you. With our last few minutes today, I'd love to hear from each of you on, your hope for the future of college sports. There's a lot of reasons to be perhaps pessimistic about this House settlement, right? But we care because we love college sports. And so I'd love to hear perhaps, your hope for the near or the future of college sports.
Start down here. Yeah, well, I see opportunity with a lot of this. There's certainly plenty of challenges. And, Professor Brandt mentioned the transfer portal. That may be the single most challenging aspect of the NIL era, in that we've created this complete free agency, unregulated model that schools are all trying to figure out how to keep up with. So, my hope for going forward is, I love that student athletes can benefit from their success and that they can be compensated at a level that's appropriate with what they deliver in terms of visibility or what somebody feels that they're worth. But we have to be able to do all this in a way that's sustainable, where we can keep everything that's great about college athletics. We talked a little bit about broad-based sports sponsorship. To me, that's one of the single most special things about college athletics. It's unique to America. It's unique to our system. You don't see this around the world. But it's had a unique funding model for a long, long time, decades and decades. And now we're flipping that model on its head. So how do we evolve with the House settlement? Hopefully we are going to find some level of federal regulation that is going to help not necessarily level the playing field, but create some real structure to where we're not going to have a patchwork of state laws that conflict with the NCAA and conflict with each other and create more confusion. And with this environment, honestly, it typically becomes a race to the bottom due to the competitive factors. So we need to have more structure, maintain broad-based sports sponsorship, and have a sustainable model for the future.
I'm going to say the opposite. I hope there's no federal involvement in college athletics. I don't think it makes sense to grant the NCAA an antitrust exemption. If they do not want to risk antitrust litigation, collectively bargain with your employees, is what I would say. Create a model that is actually legal, because I think the courts again and again and again and again have told the NCAA, hey, this practice isn't legal, this practice isn't legal, limiting student athletes, like this isn't legal. Like we've seen loss after loss after loss accumulate. Like at some point, the business model fundamentally needs to be changed. I don't think Congress is the one to bail the NCAA out of the situation. And so, truthfully, I want the market to play itself out. Like I don't think we need government involvement in college athletics. I think what the courts are saying about the NCAA's business model, I think there's going to be more litigation for sure, and we're going to find answers in how their business model fits into the grand scheme of this. And I think my hope for the future is that we find a solution where we can still operate Olympic sports at a high level, and we are still producing a high caliber level of athlete to go and compete in the Olympics. But at the same time, we are understanding of the fact of where this money flows from, primarily football, and maybe football needs to break away from the NCAA. Maybe that's the solution, right? Maybe men's and women's basketball needs to break away from the NCAA. And I don't know what that looks like. There's people smarter than me that need to figure that out. But my hope for the future is that the market just figures itself out. And it's going to be messy for a long time, and I have no doubts about that. But I don't think that's a reason for federal involvement. I think the NCAA and the institutions and the conferences need to figure out a way to really support the best interests of the student athletes, and make sure that this model that is turned into something that no one really has control over finds its way into a space where the student athletes that need to be compensated are being compensated fairly, and the student athletes that are not generating revenue still have the opportunity to go and compete at a high level?
I think personally, my background is in advertising before I went to law school. And I think objectively, if you look at regulating a group of people for their fair market value in influencer advertising just because they play a sport is just an interesting concept overall, right? You would never go to a Kendall Jenner and say, hey, we don't think 100,000 is fair market value for what you're getting. So you're going to need to dial it down. I think professionally, and our hope in our business is to innovate, right? I think a lot of us have said that, athletic departments are somewhat operating in the red for the most part. And if you were a CEO of any other company operating in the red for 5 years, I'm sure you would be fired or demoted, right? And so I think it's about bringing other people in from other industries to help innovate at this point from a business standpoint. And that's really what we're trying to do with our business is bring in the minds from other corporate structures to assist in this transition period.
I've said this many times, college players have it better than pro players as we sit here today. As Eric mentioned, we have free agency every year. In the NFL, you have to wait 4 years. In the Major League Baseball, you have to wait 6 years to be able to talk to another team. 6 years. In college, players can do it every year. Now, this is the transfer portal we're talking about, and the problem is there's no regulation. It struck me watching, say, the NFL draft or the NBA draft. They say the 6th pick is from Tennessee, and all the highlights are from Oklahoma. Or the highlights are from Ohio State. Like, wait a minute, what about Tennessee? Well, that was the last year of 6 years playing 4 different schools. And I'm old school. I think there's a value to alumni networks. I think there's a value to some brand association with one school, but we're past that. So what I am looking at for the future, and I don't know which side wants this or doesn't want it, and I'll explain in a minute, is collective bargaining, where you can have if you're going to start to a pro model, just do a pro model. Just do a pro model and have a salary cap that has teeth and have free agency after a certain number of years, and more importantly, have more than 1 year contracts. We live in a 1 year system in college sports right now. Villanova basketball, different group every year. Duke basketball, different group every year. That's where we are. Now, I know you don't want to sound like, oh, the old days were so great, but there has to be a balance. And I think management, which is the schools, does not need to be shy about collective bargaining, because right now, as AT knows, the players have all the leverage. And the only way to get leverage back is to bargain for more leverage, because as I've started this, the judges don't like the NCAA. Players are going to continue to win these lawsuits, and NCAA and school, the management of that paradigm is going to lose. It's just going to happen that way. So collective bargaining, to me, may be the answer.
I would say that my hope is, because with the whole house settlement and like the reviewing of the, like having to submit the contract over $600 or whatever, I haven't heard anything about like what's in these contracts though. Like, are these students signing away their IP rights in perpetuity? I feel like a lot of students are being taken advantage of. Of course, on the pretense they're able to monetize and make money now, but how does that play into their future? Even if they, were to transition professionally, are, these agencies or whoever able to attach to their earnings for the next 10 years of their professional career, so the NCAA is, worried about how much money they're making, but they're not putting mechanisms in place to make sure that students have access to legal representation, and they're protected on their side. So my hope is that the students, they get their fair chance to, bargain and, make good money, but also be protected for the long run because, you know, of course we see now, but as lawyers, we like to be proactive. We like to, everything is great when, you know, the contract is good, but when, you know, contracts are for when it hits the fan, you know, like when things aren't great. So I really want to see like the opportunities for students to be protected and have access to the right resources, the education, the knowledge, and representation from professionals who really do this and have been, you know, in this for a while versus some fly-by-night person who wants to represent them and they think they know everything. I want to see more of that.
Great. With that being said, I think our time is up. I would like to thank our panelists.
If I could have you sit for 2 more minutes, I want to introduce a couple people. This is presented by our Sports Law Journal. Our editor-in-chief is Hannah Posencheg for a couple of moments, and then we want to hear from our dean, Mark Alexander, right after Hannah. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Brandt. Hi, everyone. My name is Hannah Posencheg, and I am the editor-in-chief of the Sports Law Journal. Before I hand it over to Dean Alexander to close out our program today, I just wanted to take a moment to say thank you for attending this year's symposium. It is clear that the relationship between sports and finance is rapidly evolving, and our panelists today highlighted the importance of understanding its nuances. As we wrap up today's event, there are a few people I'd like to thank for the success of the symposium and of our program this year. So first, thank you, Jeff Moorad, for your continuing support of the Moorad Center. With your generosity, you've given so many in this room the opportunity to build the skills and knowledge needed to pursue a career in sports law. We are all so grateful. Next, I'd like to thank Morgan Lewis for generously sponsoring this event and for providing incredible panelists today. You are fantastic. I'd also like to thank all of our Villanova faculty, staff, and students for helping coordinate and put on this event. Starting with Dean Alexander and our administration, thank you so much for your continued support in hosting this event every year. Professor Brandt, our executive director, thank you for your leadership. It has been a pleasure working with you this semester. Samantha Myers, your help has been invaluable in putting on this event. We would be so lost without your organization, guidance, and expertise. Thank you so much for all of your support this year. Next, I'd like to give a huge thank you to Madeline and the rest of the Moorad Sports Law Journal who made this year so incredible and who often dropped everything to help support each other. In addition, I'd like to extend another huge thank you to the Moorad Sports Law Fellows for their partnership throughout the year in planning the symposium. It has been a pleasure working with you guys too. Last but certainly not least, thank you to our panelists. Thank you for coming from all over the country and speaking on these important topics in sports law. Your panels were absolutely fantastic. Thank you again, everyone, and hope to see you next year.
Thank you, Hannah. And thanks to all of you for being here. Thanks to the panelists. Thanks to the previous panelists. There's a million thanks to be given. I just want to, I guess, close by stressing how wonderful it is that we get to do this. We have a great law school here. Those who have been here know that. Those who are here for the first time, you're learning about it. We can always teach things, which we do. We teach rules of contracts and evidence and torts and things like that. But programs like this are what give an additional dimension. They give a dimension so that our students during their time here get to learn more than just the rules. They get to learn about how these things work. And we get to tell folks like yourselves about the current events. Makes us relevant in a way to the whole world. And this is just one of the ways in which I'm just so proud to be the dean here, proud to have students like Hannah running this, seeing students moderating. AT was in my class a few years ago, so this just makes me, he did a great job in my class. And, it's really wonderful to see the successes of so many folks. So it's just something where I hope you just understand that today is more than just talking about NIL. It's really a reflection on how wonderful this school is and how grateful I am that all of these folks are here and all of you are here to support it. So I thank all of you for being here, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend.